Welcome to Risk Roundup. The ongoing cyber warfare has no visible front, borders, or armies. Now, when we evaluate the ongoing cyber warfare getting integrated with emerging technologies like artificial intelligence, facial recognition, deepfake, Internet of Things, autonomous systems, electromagnetic spectrum, 5G, and more, and its scope of overall entanglement with geospace, aquaspace, and space, the anonymity of enemy soldiers in the cyber domain, and the leveling of attack capabilities, we are entering an era of democratization of destruction for which we are not prepared. As we take a step forward in the era of unknowns, the battle between cybersecurity offense and defense is expected to escalate, and emerging technologies will need to find their way into balancing the already complex security paradigm. To discuss emerging technology for cyber warfare further, I'm honored to welcome retired Brigadier General Blaine Holt to this roundup. Retired General Holt is currently the Chief Operating Officer at Braidy Industries and is based in the United States. Welcome, General Holt. We are honored to have you on this roundup.
It's great to be back with you again. Thank you very much, Doctor.
Wonderful, General Holt. So, the emerging technologies, it seems, are fundamentally changing the definition and meaning of security in not only cyberspace, but aquaspace, geospace, and space, because now cyberspace connects all these different spaces, aquaspace, geospace, and space. And as a result, there is no such thing as secure anymore in the entire CAGS human ecosystem. So when we look at the emerging technologies, from your assessment, what has changed in the security paradigm?
Well, I liked what you said when you opened the interview, when you talked about the democratization of these types of technologies and how dangerous that is. It used to be when I was on active duty in the Air Force, we viewed cyber as a domain, a military domain like any other. And we do know that was a huge mistake. It's really, when we talk about national security, it's not just the security of our armed forces and our command and control systems. It's the security of a nation and its economy and its ability to operate. And so now that I've been in private industry for the last 4 years, cyber is actually almost a greater concern for me now as a threat than it was when I was on active duty. On active duty, you would depend on really incredible resources that we hold, like the National Security Administration. You've got a lot of other agencies that are prepared with cyber type units. But here in the business community, we're vulnerable, and we have to be very careful about that. I think the glaring vulnerability that we can all look to is the United States grid, or the power grid system, because we understand how old it is and how much it has to be protected.
Yes, that is very true. The critical infrastructure is, like you said, is getting aged, and the aging infrastructure is more vulnerable because we are not able to effectively upgrade all the systems and make them resilient to any and all of these cyber attacks that could come our way. And like you said, the entire spectrum of security is changing from where you were at the time when you were on active duty to now. Everything is so very different. Everything is connected, and everything is vulnerable. And now when we see the security concept is currently being subjected to these big changes with respect to its aims and capabilities and sources, connectivity, and even dimension of threats, it makes us wonder how the many unknowns of these emerging technologies are influencing the cyber warfare. So as we focus on cyberspace, cyber warfare, and cybersecurity, what technology trends, challenges, and threats you think that we'll have to be very mindful about as we go forward?
That's right. I think one of the things that I find to be a source of optimism, or something we can look to for hope in this very dynamic area, very dangerous area, is the emerging technologies that we now see appearing for civilian companies on the horizon. And if there's something that I've learned over the years, especially in cyber, you can't just have one silver bullet. You can't just say, I called a cyber company and so now we're fine. That's the one thing I can tell you will not work. So what we want to do here as we build our company, and Braidy is currently a startup company with a very big manufacturing footprint, is we want to build an ecosystem or a very, very layered architecture of different types of cyber solutions. And some of them are not even obvious cyber plays. They seem to be something else, but they can work in a cyber defense, and I'll explain that. So, in a very pure form, I would say one of the things that has to be watched very carefully is insider threats. And what I mean by that is there could be a bad actor in your company. That's the easiest one to kind of think about and say, oh, I have an insider threat problem. I should go find out about that because I could have my network destroyed that way. But there's another type of insider threat that's much more common, I think, in our companies, and that is unwitting, uneducated, and untrained users who willingly click on that link that ends up being the spear phishing attack or the ransomware malware that drops into the account. And so one of these emerging companies, it's called Defend Edge. They're a startup based out of Chicago. They've invented a brilliant technology called Scion that actually is very, very nice at operating behind the scenes and looking at anomalies of the users and looking at normal behavior patterns. And they harness artificial intelligence and machine learning to basically build profiles that gives managers a very, very good assessment about whether they're vulnerable in the workforce or not. And it's not about just a mousetrap to catch an employee. It's much more about looking at behavior patterns that lead to a bad place in your network. And that can be very, very helpful.
Yes.
Another one that I would mention that's not as traditional is look at how vulnerable corporate supply chains can be. Okay, so in your supply chain, you have an incredible amount of trust in a supply chain to make sure that the inputs and the outputs to a business continue unimpeded. Well, most of those ride on digital highways. It's not just about the physical act of moving things. So one company that you might not even think has a cyber play is a young company called Alchemy, another artificial intelligence big data company based in Seattle. What they're working on is end-to-end supply chain visualization. And why that's powerful is because they can give you predictive analytics into your supply chain. They can actually analyze all the transactions several tiers down. Things like this random car accident happened in Italy carrying your product. What is the cascading rippling effect in your supply chain? Or a cyber event happens. What is the cascading effect? It actually looks at geopolitical events around the world and starts to pull together things, and managers can actually do exercising in black swan events to say, what if we had a ransomware attack? How does my supply chain get affected? And it's an amazing piece of technology. The other one that people would never really immediately equate to cyber is blockchain. Blockchain technology in a logistics sense, or in a what we would call provenance, being able to transact without trust. So the idea would be in a logistics setting, I have a part that's coming through the fiber lines, and that part has processes and procedures for how to make that, so you know it's that. But because we have blockchain technology, if it's up in the ledger, it can't be counterfeited anymore. And right now, counterfeit parts in the United States supply chain, that's a very big issue. But some people would never look at that as a cyber issue. But this is where these things get interdicted. Another layer that I'm looking at very carefully at Braidy is encryption standards. Battelle company ran for 4 years straight the old Alan Turing encryption standard, which we call quantum key distribution. And quantum key ran perfectly at Battelle for 4 years. That company, QX, that is fielding quantum key distribution for commercial companies, is putting that out now. And again, if you start to develop these layers and you always have an eye towards how am I vulnerable, you're starting to build a much tougher outer shell to your company. and that's where we want to be. I'm in a very enviable position because I have a blank canvas with this startup company on how to build it the right way, and what I have learned along the way is that it absolutely has to be different solutions working together in a really synergistic way.
Yes, no, you are right about that. I mean, I'm glad that you are thinking about all these different scenarios that you need to address for your organization, your company, to protect its manufacturing facility. Because the example that you gave about the supply chain, that it will let you look at any geopolitical event and how it's going to impact, that's a very useful tool. Now, I'm sure that each of these tools that you talked about, they all bring strengths, but they also bring vulnerabilities, because whenever any company looks at, how anything is going to, any geopolitical event is going to impact their supply chain, that strength that they have in looking at those events, that also can create vulnerabilities, because hackers can hack into that and they can easily know what is making this company vulnerable, and those vulnerabilities can be, exploited. So there are many, each of these technology brings us strength and each of these technology brings us weaknesses. So how we address all of that, to make sure that we as an organization become resilient, that will need to be seen, because there are so many vulnerabilities and so many interconnectedness and interdependencies. So the security is no longer like government affair. We used to think that government will protect us from any and all security threats coming towards us, but cyberspace has completely changed those fundamentals. So it's a very difficult scenario. So as you evaluate all these different technologies for your company, Brady organization, to make this manufacturing system more resilient, which technologies you think are, bringing security risk to organizations like yours?
So the thing that you have to do is you have to have really great outside partners, I think, that can evaluate the types of technologies you're looking at for your own business. So here's where I think by process we could make a big mistake. You find a technology, you love it, you think it'll work for you, but that you don't finish right there. What you have to do is you have to go outside the organization to somebody who doesn't have your problem set but understands the technology and can go in and evaluate it and then look for those vulnerabilities like you're saying. They're very important. But I also think, and this is what we'll be doing at Brady, we need a robust exercise program. And that's something that I'll be bringing to this company from the military, which is it's not enough to just have these safeguards in place. You have to exercise them and wring them out to make sure they actually can work. And that happens with red teaming. That happens with, there's really great MSSPs out there. Optiv is one that comes to mind, that can actually do that work for you and work with the ecosystem that you kind of built. So in the case of Brady, you have $700 million worth of aluminum rolling machines, everything from furnaces, hot mills, very heavy industrial equipment. But all of these things should be classified as IIoT, Industrial Internet of Things. And so I'm looking at it right now. I'm currently evaluating a company called Xage, Xage, because they specifically focus on those controls. But what I would like to do is, as we start to put this all together, then the company has to have a regular exercising with all of the players involved, and we have to stress these systems out. We have to prosecute their vulnerabilities, and then we have to go back to these providers and say, so this is what our data has told us, and this is what we have found. And if you want to continue to be a partner with us, we would like to work together to address these things, to keep shoring up vulnerabilities. The other thing, as you know, is it's a very dynamic world, and it's a very big game of cat and mouse. And so as you're working very hard to strengthen yourself, and you never stop that process, it's not static, the bad guys are doing the exact same thing. But the thing that we should be very careful about is when we put a definition on what a bad guy is. Because your bad guy now can be anybody. Your bad guy could be a 15-year-old sitting in Kiev.
Yes.
It could be a state actor at a cyber center under a national flag. It could be a contracted bad guy from one of your competitors who would really like to see something bad happen to you. I hate to say that, but that's up for grabs. And so what we have to do is the way I explain what I intend to design for our own systems here at Braidy to our other executives is we're building like a Jenga tower, a big Jenga tower. And at the very top, you've got the ERP, and then below that, you've got different processing systems. You've got back office accounting, and then you've got, but the foundation and the base are these layers of protection that we need to keep our employees safe and trained and good. And that's not just software. That's people coming in and training your workforce, and those types of things. And that way, when you have a Jenga tower like that, you can actually, like you said, to your point, you can lose a few blocks,
Yes.
but you're okay. But you're okay. Was your backup process, was that regimented? You should get to the point where you can go through a real bad cyber thing and be okay because you've got a consequence management plan in place. And it's the plans and the relationships and the training that actually are foundational to the software. Those have to go together. When I interview cyber companies for us, and I've qualified quite a few to compete for our business, the first thing I say right out of the gate is your technology will have to actually work. That's one thing, but that's not the number one thing. The number one thing is when we hire a cyber company, we're hiring a relationship. And the thing is when you're in a very calm boardroom and there's a salesman selling you a cyber solution, well, it's all very calm, it's all very nice, and the demos usually work perfectly. It's when that bad incident happens, who's at the other end of that phone, and who's there to make it right for you, who understands your system. And that's what the successful candidates with us have to do. They have to prove, oh, no. The buzzword is the throat to choke. Who's my throat to choke? and that's how we're kind of bringing it together here. But you're absolutely right. There are going to be vulnerabilities, and we'll just have to keep addressing them.
Yes, I mean, because this what you described is industrial Internet of Things. That itself, opens up so many layers of vulnerabilities, because now we are talking about IoTs, small devices that could be in probably hundreds of thousands, depending on what your broader spectrum is. And then it depending on whether it's a fiber line network, or whether you are using 5G fiber, just fiberless network. So if it is 5G, then it again opens up more vulnerabilities. So there are, and then data security, as the data is transferred, data at rest, data in motion. So there are so many different vulnerabilities that enters into the spectrum, because now you are talking about Internet of Things. So whether those IoTs, the devices have standards, whether they are they have any process capabilities, where the data is going to be processed, who is going to process, whether it will be encrypted. So then data security and data transfer, and there are a lot of different vulnerabilities, so many different points. So I'm glad that you are taking this approach as a layered approach, because it's not just one solution that is going to fit all the requirements. There are so many different variables you have to consider, and it seems like you are evaluating and considering all of those variables. But now another point also that needs to be addressed is about the artificial intelligence, because right now, if you look at authentication technologies, identification and authentication technologies, not only for human employees that work there, but also for the IoT devices that you will have, because that also will need to be addressed, because they will also need to have authentication procedures and technology. So we are not only talking about humans that will have identification and authentication technology, but also the devices. So we are talking about identification, authentication on both fronts. And now a lot of countries and a lot of organizations are talking about using biometrics data, but those also bring so many vulnerabilities, because AI can pretty much copy a lot of all the biometric data, and then it brings us more complex vulnerabilities. Because once that is copied, then it's hard to undo that kind of damage that AI can do. So how do you see the AI or machine learning, deep learning becoming a problem for organizations like yours in cyber offense as well as defense?
Well, I think from an AI perspective, um, you know, your algorithms and your heuristics are no longer just ground that the scientists and the mathematicians have in their development of these products. You actually have to have a very forward-looking management team that will sit down with the scientists as you start to employ these technologies and talk more about your business and get them to understand, AI is built on a foundation of rules of thumb or heuristics, and the heuristics have to be agreed to by the company. Otherwise, you can lose control of that very fast. So you get into the series of "I didn't mean to" with the development team. But getting to your point about authentication, I think from at least what I'm seeing as we go through this design build, it's actually blockchain technology that is a very nice backstop to a lot of these technologies. And whether it's biometric authentication, parts authentication, transaction authentication, which is a big one. The blockchain company, again, it's a very new one. They're all kind of new. VerityX is incubated technology out of Moog Corp. And what we're finding with that blockchain technology, which was designed for a digital supply chain, so you can actually send a digitized supply chain through with complete confidence that it's been authenticated. We're finding second, third, and fourth uses of that technology for everything from, and this we haven't brought up yet, but I think it's very, very important to what we do, intellectual property authentication and intellectual property protection. So that first company we talked about, Defend Edge, again, it's always a cross-section and a layering. Defend Edge plus this blockchain from VerityX can work very, very nicely to protect an intellectual property portfolio. And to your point, it really is all about authentication. Who should have access to this part of my web? Do we know who they are? Have they been authenticated? Is there a transaction? And if there's a transaction, can I pull it up to the blockchain? This is like, you have sensors all over a manufacturing facility. We're looking at a sensor company that will help us dump data into the Alchemy engines to get our predictive analytics. Well, when you use the blockchain, any place where there's a transaction, you have an opportunity to authenticate something. And so whether it's an employee tapping in a time card because they came to work that day, they logged into a computer, all these things are transactions. They spent money on behalf of the company. All those things are transactions. So what I like to tell folks is I've got a lot of really great technologies. There's going to be this great ERP, but I'm gonna have this marinate, and I'm gonna marinate all this in blockchain because I want to pick up on the transactions because those are the leading indicators that something's not quite right.
But what you are suggesting is to take the entire process on the blockchain for your organization?
Yes, to the extent that we can or we feel comfortable doing that. And again, it's going to be crawl, walk, run. We'll start out with pilots, and then we'll go into programs of record in certain portfolios for where we're working. But we find great promise in this. And the nice part is I am finding these little companies with this emerging technology that are very, very eager and interested in working together. So it used to be in the old days of cyber, it was, I have a cyber solution, so I'm going to create a stovepipe and a silo, and you can only use my stuff and nobody else's stuff. It's getting very, very different. Everybody understands they're specializing in a particular area, and that industry really wants a layered approach and solution.
Definitely.
If there's a missing link on this path, I think you're probably going to get to it anyway, but it's going to be this distance between government regulation and what industry is doing. On the government side, my kind of perspective is that the face of the government's a little slow for business, and the technology is moving so fast that government's having a really hard time keeping up with what the marketplace needs. But if I drop that to something much more rudimentary, our grid, our national security grid, that's the vulnerability that I see from government not being quite on step with where it needs to be, and at least understanding these technologies and how they can work.
Yes, definitely. No, I agree with you on that because it's the entire process of regulation policy making is a very long complex process, and it doesn't fit the requirement of today's rapidly developing and emerging technology. So that is a challenge, and we'll have to eventually come up with a proper way of regulating and um, developing policies. But that is a topic of entirely different discussion. But what you mentioned about the intellectual property authentication, that is very interesting, because I have not heard anyone talking about that yet. And that what you are saying is absolutely correct, that there is a lot of stealing happening about the intellectual property. So we do need to ensure that the intellectual property is authenticated and identified properly. But how do they do that? Because any intellectual property, if you don't have the global patent on it or global rights, then people can make slight modification, and they can make it their own, because as long as you modify some process or some small aspect of it, then it's no longer doesn't have the rights to that modified technology. So how does this company authenticate this technology, and how does it work? Because we are now talking about the global standards, and we are talking about the global patent, and not everybody goes for the global patents.
Sure. So, in my opinion, I think even in a digitized world, even with blockchain technology, you're still left with this strategy that most people use to protect their intellectual property, and that is you only show a certain amount of the goods. So some of that is sitting in your patents. That's the absolute, I can go to any court and defend this. But then there's going to be a portion of the secret sauce which is never actually in the light of day, and those are your trade secrets, and the two together make something that's very special and unique to you. But what I think I can see happening as blockchain emerges and as it becomes much more commonplace as a background. Again, it's a technology that people won't even know they're using the blockchain, and yet they're in the blockchain and they're using it just fine. Everybody equates this to cryptocurrency, and that's like the snowflake on the tip of the iceberg. But what I think I see is if you look at Apple with its iTunes model, so you go and you see a song and you buy the song, and the song only costs you $1, but you bought the song. What did you really do? You paid the royalty to the artist who made the song, and that's their intellectual property. So you basically asked that for your life, I want to rent this intellectual property that you made, and I'm going to use it whenever I want to use it, and that's what I paid you for. So if we can have much better provenance, meaning trust that doesn't have to be exhibited from a relationship, it can be exhibited from a technology where using the mathematical algorithms that create these ledgers that can be constantly compared down to the second for authenticity, then we're left with a vehicle where you can actually either create a marketplace for intellectual property, or you can actually lease intellectual property. And if those costs can come down because we're not doing it in a traditional way, I have to buy a truck, I have to put this stuff on the truck, I have to get it to you, and I don't want you to know how I made it. But now I'm doing it through fiber optics, and I'm letting you rent my intellectual property, and I give you the right to print this widget. And then that goes away, and the license goes away because the blockchain said you could print it one time. That was what the smart transaction had. The costs can go down to a place where, just like iTunes, it's really not in your best interest to try to steal that IP. I'd much rather just quickly buy the song from Sting than try to go get a band that could play Sting really well and then record them. It's just much easier. And so this may be a place where we're fighting around the world now to protect our IP, especially, you talk about all these trade wars with China. At the base of those debates is protection of IP. To the extent that we can bring in technologies to enforce that outside of a court of law or disincentivize folks to go do that. What we're learning in the parts business, which is it's a fascinating example. Our parts are nanotechnology metal parts that we make and that we'll be soon marketing. Each of them has a unique grain structure, a microscopic nanotechnology grain structure that becomes a fingerprint. I can put the fingerprint into the chain. So now, how hard is it to make a sprocket look like another sprocket in every way, shape, and form? Great, but you can't counterfeit it anymore because it won't have that fingerprint and it won't scan the right way. It won't be in the ledger. And so it absolutely wipes out a $1 million industry of counterfeiting parts as we start to look to go to scale and to ramp that up. But I think these are the places where we'll have the most success in trying to really kind of get our arms around protecting people's intellectual property.
Sure, no, I hear you on that. I mean, as we move towards the decentralized economy, that these fundamental development of blockchain, for to get in everyone, all the products, all the services, all the IPs, people, even humans, for the digital identity, and even for IoT's things, to give them identity. All of that could be on blockchain, but right now I think blockchain itself is facing some challenges because there are scalability issues, there are energy issues, so there are a lot of technical challenges that needs to be overcome before we can broadly and widely use this blockchain for the vision that you just talked about. And it is necessary that we overcome all those challenges so that we can put everything on that and we can protect everyone. And if we are able to even, let's say, put every single weapon that is being developed, every single cyber tool that is developed, and everything is on that, then we know that who is downloading that particular cyber weapon and who is trying to what are they trying to use it for. So we will be able to prevent a lot of cyber wars, and we will be able to prevent a lot of cyber crimes and damages that happen. So there is a lot of great potential in blockchain, and I hope that we can overcome those technical challenges quickly so that we can get on those developing those blockchain, and we can bring some sort of security, trust, and transparency that everybody is looking for. So I'm really glad about the way you are thinking about this entire approach to Braidy Industries, and the nano devices that nano chips that you are talking about. That itself will have great potential for benefits, potential benefits, but also there will be a lot of potential of vulnerabilities. So we will not just have to talk. We are not talking only about the cyber vulnerabilities to do nano chips, but different kind of vulnerabilities that it itself could bring. So there is a lot at stake, and I'm really glad that you are having this broader thought leadership on how to secure the nanochips and the manufacturing supply chain and everything for Braidy Industries. So having said that, what would you like to tell our global and viewers and listeners about Braidy Industries and about your efforts to bring the security to your organization?
So at Braidy Industries, we're building the first new aluminum rolling mill in 40 plus years, and it's highly automated. We're talking about the 13th largest building in the world laid on its side, and we'll be putting out 500,000 tons of aluminum, transportation grade aluminum every year. We're talking about $700 million of the state-of-the-art equipment, from furnaces to rolling machines, to get the types of parts that will be used to replace steel on cars, on electric vehicles, on vehicles that need much higher gas mileage with the CAFE standards and those types of things. So end to end, we also are very, very green. We have lowest carbon inputs to the mill, getting our raw inputs from a smelter in Siberia. And then we have the only low emitting source for an aluminum mill in the United States. So that means that car companies can actually purchase the metal, get a lighter weight product. It goes farther on a tank of gas or on a battery, and they're using the least amount of carbon in the product. Now, the rest of Braidy is all science. So we have aluminum and nanotechnology, and we have all the other alloys in nanotechnology for parts that you might see inside the car that make them go, and they actually lightweight even further. So if you can imagine that, you can imagine that is a lot to protect in terms of infrastructure. It's a lot to protect in terms of science, intellectual property, We, our scientists, and they're amazing up in Boston, have I mean, it's a very diverse company hailing from all around the world, and they're wonderful. But that means that those scientists have their own Rolodexes, their own interconnections, their own spider web of contacts around the world. And so you can see that that would lend itself to a great challenge of making sure that they come to work and they have a safe cyber environment to work in, that everybody is validated, authenticated, and that we don't ever want to mess up their creativity or their innovation or get in their way to do their job. So managers and leaders have to develop systems and approaches that enable and support while not creating obstructions and intrusions for them. And then if we look at the mill has got liquid metal at the start of it, where we're pouring big slabs, and that's very dangerous work. And that's got an IIoT control associated with it. So you can see how seriously I take, and the team here takes, the safety of those workers. And we know a big layer of that safety program, EHS, is cyber related. And a lot of people would not necessarily say that EHS has anything to do with cyber. And to me, those are inextricably linked.
Yes, yes, I hear you and I agree with you on that. I think after the discussion is over, you and I should talk about data security. I would like to tell you some things on that. So I really appreciate your participation today, General Holt, and thank you so much for sharing all the insights that you have gathered while you are preparing the Braidy Industries for the cybersecurity, or giving the security resilience that you are hoping that it would have. And we appreciate your thoughtful insight on the emerging technologies and the solutions that are out there for that can help organizations like Braidy to achieve the cybersecurity. And our global viewers and listeners would benefit tremendously from the information you provided today and helping raise awareness of this very critical topic. We thank you for that.
Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to be with you.
Wonderful, General Holt. So, Risk Roundup, a global initiative launched by Risk Group, is a security risk reporting for risk emerging from existing and emerging technologies, technology convergence and transformation happening across cyberspace, aquaspace, geospace, and space. We at Risk Group believe that risk management, security, and peace, they walk together hand in hand. Though security is related to the management of threats and peace to the management of conflict, risk management is related to management of security vulnerabilities as well as management of conflict. And it is not possible to conceive any one of the three without the existence of the other two. All three concepts feed into each other. We believe that the security we build for ourselves is precarious and uncertain until it is secure for everyone across nations. Tradition becomes our security. So if we build a culture of managing risk effectively, it will lead us to security, and security will lead us to peace. Let's manage the existing and emerging risks together. For more information on the Risk Roundups, to watch the Risk Roundup video audio podcast, please go to riskgroupllc.com and do not forget to subscribe and share. Until next time, I'm Jayashree, host of Risk Roundup, signing off. See you next time. Thank you.